Well, hello everyone. Welcome to today's strategy session, Data, the Steam of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So began in the 18th century, the first industrial revolution used the water and the steam power to materialize production. Now the first industry revolution is building on the third and categorized by the fusion of technologies, blurring the lines between physical, digital, and the biologic papers. So in 2021, it is data that is propelling innovation forward. Thank you everyone for joining us. A big welcome to our panel. We have a very distinguished panel of speakers and thought leaders from some of the large data centers who will discuss the why, where, and what is next for the data and the centers. So before we get started, let's have a couple of housekeeping items here. The panel will be available to answer the questions. During the session, you are welcome to post your questions or comments at any time. So we will collect those questions and respond to them during or after the session. If we could not get some of the questions today, we'll make sure we do a follow-up with you afterward. So let's welcome Mr. Gary Collin, the founder and the president of the Hosting Island. Hosting Island is the award-winning strategic initiative created to increase the wellness of the benefits of hosting the digital assets in the island and Irish companies designing, building, and operating data centers globally. Gary, please lead the way.
Thank you, Grace. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. We really have a distinguished group of guys joining me this afternoon. Dave, you didn't get the memo. You got to have a bald head to be in our gang, but we'll let you away with it for now, man.
Let me take it off.
But we really have a great group of guys. We've got Michael Winterson with a wonderful title, Managing Director. That's a European title if ever I saw one, Mike. Doing great work for Equinix in the European market. We've got David McCool, I call him, but his name is McCall, and he's joining us from Atlanta today. You're very welcome, David. And Brian isn't quite in yet, but that's just he's always the latecomer. And Brian is going to join us from CyrusOne. And it's sufficient to say that we have number 1, number 4, and number 6 by value of the real estate investment trusts in the world on the call. And I'm not going to say which one is 1, which one is 4, and which one's 6. If they want to say that, they can say it themselves. So we really have some of the great builders of what is the Industrial Revolution 4.0. Well, what is it, right? Before we talk to the guys, let's just get a little insight into what is this Industrial Revolution all about. As Grace rightly said, if you haven't been aware, we're in the 4th one. The 4th Industrial Revolution. The first one started with the steam engine, but not just with steam, but with steam, and that led to the steam engine, the steam ships. It actually was the pumps originally to take the water out of the coal mines, but effectively it was the concentrated centralization of steam that got the whole catalyst where the world became very small once we had ships that could go faster than the wind, as you know. So then what do we have now? We skipped the middle 2, but today, what is the steam? It's data, but not just any form of data. It's the insights that we can get from data that we can then point towards challenges and problems, because ultimately having loads of anything is useless unless it's actually useful for you. But like all things, and particularly change and industrial revolutions and so much change, and you hear of transformations, there's 2 sides to it. This same data and its supporting infrastructure really is genuinely a weapon of mass invention. It's putting in the hands of 10-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 30 to 40,000 times more power than put man on the moon for $1,000. But on the alternative side to it, there always is an alternative side. We also then have the same infrastructure with the same data, with the same opportunities as a weapon of mass distraction. And we see that in our society all along. Let's not allow the weapon of mass distraction that gets so many headlines distract us from the wonderful work that goes on with the data, with the infrastructure. But this is the stuff that often gets the headlines with Facebook and all the other social media platforms. You can see it as part of the utopian future. You can see it as part of a dystopian future, but don't ignore it. You may or may not be aware how much you're using it. And whilst this here in this little graphic is a joke, it is more and more part of everything we do, particularly if you use a smartphone. There's not a single industry, not one right now, that I can think of that isn't driven by data, digital apps, marketplaces. There's a great one in there actually for cannabis. There's a cannabis marketplace now, which it shows you where society has gone to. But with regard to the connected planet, there was a time when we were amazed at the fact that we had one device connected for every person in the world. Well, now, as we enter into 2022, 2023, we're looking at between 40 and 50 billion devices connected, 7 things per person. We had COVID last year. Now, the chaps we're going to talk to later who have been big builders and big innovators and big parts of the infrastructure that we are all now working on, including this call, they'll admit now that it was all planned and it was all going to work and everything was fine. But I can tell you, when everybody went to working from home, there was a lot of people saying, I hope it works. And it did. And that was extraordinary because remember what the internet and how it built. It built organically. There was no blueprint. But what it has done is it's increased our dependency on data or digital. So quite literally, when we look at that previous slide, COVID has taken it off the charts, honestly, to levels that we haven't seen before, and also for dependencies that we haven't seen before. Now, whilst time will tell, we're probably not going back. We're just innovating quicker. Industries that were laggards are now actually front and center. In terms of the amount of devices that we're now anticipating, 1 trillion. My goodness, how big is 1 trillion? Well, 1 trillion is a number that if we all started to count it now, would take us 31,344 years to get to. That's how big a number it is. They're things that we expect to be connected by 2030. How much data is that? Many of us talk, and including myself, more data is created in 18 months now than was ever created up to 2030. Well, let's just turn that in its head. By 2025, every 6 weeks, the same amount of data will be created as was created up to 2012. It's extraordinary because data creates data and our dependency on it. How much is that? Well, I can't compute zettabytes and terabytes and all these other bytes that you hear of, but let's think of it as a grain of rice. If 1 grain of rice was a byte of data, how much data do these guys we're going to be talking to now have to keep out of the rain, secure, and traversing the networks of the world faster than we can blink? Well, if 1 grain of rice was a zettabyte of data, it would fill the Pacific Ocean. It's 11 kilometers deep in some places, or 9 miles if you're in the United States. We lost a plane there not too long ago. We still haven't found it. So it gives you a sense of the scale. That's 1 zettabyte. And we're on the 165 Pacific Oceans of data per year, every year from 2025. And the responsibility of our group, or partially in their peer group, is to keep that safe. And it's everywhere. There's not a place in the world that's immune from data. And if we go forward 3 to 5 years, there are parts of Africa now that possibly will have curtailed water, but they'll have 5G broadband. It's extraordinary. So I'll bring the chaps in. I don't think Brian has joined us yet, so that's okay. We have Michael. Michael, thank you so much for joining us from London.
Gary, I'm on, by the way.
Oh, Brian, how are you? I was saying you were going to be fashionably late, and there you are. You just appear. Well, you're very welcome to the show.
11 Mayday texts to you went unanswered, but I'm glad to be here now. Thank you.
That's okay, because whatever way we are running, you appeared and Michael disappeared. So obviously we only have so many licenses. So I'm going to ask my first question until Michael comes back into yourself. You've just seen that that's one hell of a journey from 2000 to 2021 when the internet was born, and now we're looking at 15 to 30 billion things connected. You've been part of that, Brian. You've been part of that. You've seen it start, you've seen the middle, and you're continuing on. What's your experiences of that particular period of time, and how much has it affected you and in your own personal development in this industry?
A lot of us look like we're a lot better and more talented than we are, because growth has been, aside for a few hiccups the last 20 years, but it's been pretty strong. So all of us are doing pretty well, and all of us are having a lot of successes. So, I mean, it pays for my kids' college and mortgages, and everything's been good. And we've all got to watch companies grow and help build them. It's fascinating. Your points are more fascinating. We started out, pouring cement and steel, and then we started trying to squeeze it to get more efficient and all that. And I'm reminded with your examples of which weighs more, a ton of feathers or a ton of bricks? Well, obviously they weigh the same. That data that's overwhelming us now is it's extraordinary in that it doesn't mean anything unless we can distill and get to the right data. So as with anything, how much is that? 100, I'll take it. Well, I didn't mean $100. I meant $100 million. Oh, I didn't like that. That burden is getting harder and harder. And then at the same time, to get more services to every corner of the earth and every person on the earth, what do we have to do? We have to have better economics. That includes don't chew on the wrong data all the time, but it means use efficiencies and scale and all that. And oh, by the way, this lockdown thing just told us, where we used to build these things that looked a lot like the phone networks, big towers and big buildings, and all the phone calls went through them. And suddenly IP networks look like what? Like cellular networks, any to any. So how we deploy, where we deploy, taking advantage of economics and scale, and not building the old way, but building based on data flow, is going to be key to letting us keep grow and not overwhelm ourselves and just kind of throw it all out and go back to the chisel and stone.
What's extraordinary about, Brian, talking to you now, if I might say, to talking to you, and obviously you're now at CyrusOne, but maybe 5 years ago in somewhere else, you would have been talking an awful lot more about capital deployed and real estate investment and return on investment of capital deployed. And now you're talking about data. You're talking about the needs of the one, because that one is 7 billion.
We most of the companies, the bigger ones in this space, we make money on real estate, but what used to be real estate decisions are now tech, CTOs, operators, operations people, security people, all these things. And yes, it is hard assets. And Gary, that brings to another good point, which is with all the cloud, all the on-demand, all the now, cement still only dries at a certain rate of speed, right? Steel beams still only get founded over long periods of time. So it's there's this inherent, how do we keep up? Because digital happens in a milliseconds and nanoseconds when we want, and we're waiting for our cement to dry on a new building. Oh, but by the way, we're still waiting for the permit. So there's this inherent friction that bets have to be made, and the bets can't be made based on real estate. They got to be made on data flow that you talked about.
It's extraordinary. And Dave, if you'd like to come in, we throw away numbers like 30 billion, 25 billion to 1 trillion at the end of the decade. And a lot of people don't probably realize, and I certainly don't until I talk to my own kids, that from the time we get up in the morning, we're basically interacting with things that are creating data, to the time we go to bed in the evening when Alexa tells me to turn off the fan and go to bed. You fat arse, baldy Irishman. Tell us a bit about the life of a normal person right now, and how much they're interfacing with things that are interfacing with data. And guess where the data goes? A center.
Yeah, you know, it's we don't even recognize it in so many instances. I my wife got me this iWatch thing that I was like, I'm not going to put that on my wrist. Are you crazy? I can't live without it. I wake up, I want to see how it reported on my sleep activity during the night. I want to check my blood pressure. I want to check my EKG. You know, it's looking at the algorithm or the arrhythmias. You know, is there anything detecting? I didn't even know I needed that a few months ago. And it's feeding into my app. And whenever there's an anomaly, I forward that on to my doctor. And my feet haven't even hit the ground yet in the morning. And then I head into, I used to get on my wife thought it would be a good idea to get one of those smart scales. I don't know if you've seen or heard of these things. That's probably, as a technologist and a person interested in data, the first data tragedy in our house, because it no longer reports. I don't need that kind of judgment first thing in the morning. You know, all the way down to the coffee pot, and it's turning on and it's interacting with the other devices in my house, and my thermostats, you know, all my Nest thermostats throughout the home. And I didn't know that I needed it to interact with that. But, you know, as we go through our day, before I'd even logged into my computer or checked email, just my get up and get moving, I'm generating data. I'm personally generating data. The devices in my home are generating data. And I want to be able to leverage that to kind of Brian's point earlier, all of these devices, and they're just incrementally growing. We think of the smartphone and these other things, but there's so many devices coming to our homes before we ever get to the office, with the idea that they are going to, through the ingesting of, the organizing of, and then leveraging the data, I can make my life easier. I can make my home more efficient. I can make it more convenient. And all of that is generating a lot of it dies right there at my house, but a significant portion of it is getting, certainly anything I want to do, take action on, is being saved in somebody's data center, mine, Brian's, Michael's, Amazon's, somebody's. And it's an interesting new world that we live in.
But isn't that the extraordinary thing, what you said? I didn't know that I needed it.
Yeah.
And then I can't live without it. Is it a bit like when you're a teenage boy and you find girls?
Yes, although not as exciting now.
Yeah,
that
okay,
I've
all right,
crossed,
okay.
crossed 50.
Oh, sorry. We also should say, or found boys. We need to be, let's be politically correct here.
Yeah, so, you know, somebody that's caught our imagination, right, and accelerated our heart. It's you could tell your age when you wake up in the morning and you realize that all the magic of the interwebs worked, and you could smell the coffee or the tea brewing downstairs, and it's all working the way it's supposed to, and doing it in an energy efficient manner. You know, it knows. In fact, right now I don't have smart enough devices, but at some point they're going to take that data, kind of like what Brian was talking about. I need enough data to make decisions off of it that means something, that bring value. I don't want any more data than that. Get rid of the rest. And I know we've got a bunch of security-minded people on here, so maybe we can talk about the security of data later. But I want eventually the system to know, oh, he or she is up at this time, and here's the things that they like to see and do in the order that they like to see and do them, and have them available to me just in time, wildly efficient, but when I need it. I mean, I think that's the path to nirvana there. And
isn't that the truth? Isn't that exactly the truth? And it's a great time. Welcome back, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Gary, you got me at dinner, but that's okay.
okay.
So I'm out on vacation with my family in the middle of dinner at a restaurant. That's what data does to you, right? Here we are, connected by Zoom, using the restaurant Wi-Fi. But you know what's really cool is I don't mind. And the reality is, I look at our industry and I look at what we're talking about now. I think the key thing, I want to come back to what Brian said. You know, we know how to find real estate, and we know how to build things that are efficient, and we get the building. But I think, you know, taking the joking aside, that what David's bringing up about what personal data we want, I see that we have a role to play, fundamentally stewarding data through its lifetime. We are ports or airports of data. Data is captured, it's aggregated, it's traded, it's transported, it's stored, it's processed, and ultimately, as David rightly said, it's ejected when its economic value is no longer relevant. And I think we need to recognize as we go forward that that's what our role is to guess, where does the data need to be collected, where does it need to be processed, where does it need to be traded, and where it need to be stored. And I think that's the fundamental challenge for us. It's not finding a good piece of real estate, it's understanding how data works and moves and is exchanged. For fun or for work.
Well, for the purpose of a lot of people, including policymakers and decisions and all the rest, a lot of those, and I speak for Ireland as well, you know, I'm often told, and I'm sure you are, is that they're very concerned about these data centers because they think it's going to be replaced by the cloud. That there's a general lack of knowledge between data is in a center, in the cloud, and, you know, terminologies that can confuse those, even in the industry. But what I wanted to ask you, Michael, was, and it's great that you're based in Europe, because coming off the back of what David said there, we're distilling it down to useful data, intelligence, etc. You'd nearly suggest a term called little data is better than big data. And one of the things we found, didn't we, in Europe with GDPR, was it was a great opportunity for many companies here to look at what the junk they had. And because it was a liability, a lot of them just got rid of it.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, GDPR is going to be a pain in the ass. It's going to get us to think about data. But I just think GDPR is one facet or one side of an entire Rubik's Cube, which is data philosophy. So we talk about, you know, that it's really easy for some journalists to come up with some phrase, data is the new oil. And there are many allegories with real physical world. But I think the issue here is we're all fundamentally watching our customers replace physical processes at the business or consumer level with a digital process. And two things come out of that. One is the first thing, the killer app, is you physically replace something and you save money or make money out of doing that. The beauty is you then release it to programmers and you give programmers the ability to create anything. And as capricious as it sounds, what Dave is talking about is, you know, fundamentally the iPhone and a $2 trillion business called Apple started with a killer app. Let's deliver some MP3 music to people and then let's stick a SIM chip in it. But look what it's become. I mean, I'm literally using an iPhone to be on this call. I think we don't know what are the humongously valuable data assets that we'll be generating in the future. Yeah. But we're, you know, in 5 or 6 years, we're going to be shocked. We're also going to have a deluge of data that has to be flushed out of the system. And I guess somehow we have to help our customers figure out, using pricing, especially when it comes to electricity and renewability, how to price all this to make customers make good choices as to when to keep data, when to shuffle data, when to delete data. But we'll see.
And this final section on this section, but I'll open it up to the three of you. Do you think the analogy of the steam and data is appropriate? Are you driving? Do you think you are the steam, or the custodials of the steam, or the distributors of the steam?
Wow. Well, I'll do a quick one on that one. Industry 4.0 is data is the new steam. Got that. But trading data for success in the market, I don't think we know what that means yet. We just have to be ready to locate data centers at the right place and to connect to them with cross connects or peering exchanges or cloud interconnects, whatever we got to build. We've got to have all that infrastructure in our data centers to optimize the performance and reduce the consumption of resources to allow that to happen.
Ryan?
You know, it's a bit like if you fancy philosophers like Nietzsche or behavioral scientists like Freud, I think the commonality in those two, they said, you know, the most brutal crime to self is lying to self. Having all this data gives us some clarity that we could never have before. Imagine the people building the faster horses and buggies while Henry Ford was driving around the building honking the horn. And it is Ford who said, yeah, you got to listen to customers. But he said also, if I only listened to customers, I too would have built a faster horse and buggy. So it's up to all of us to sit here and go, what the hell do we do with it? A Fortune 20 CEO, I was at a little event a few months ago, and he was asking people, so what's the biggest change with all this stuff? Well, I remember about a year ago, every one of us, at least that can grow a beard, had a playoff hockey beard going on. We had sweatpants on and all this. And I said, the biggest change is this, we're doomed at home. These forums actually work 1,000 times better than I ever imagined. And you know what? We actually get up and we shave now. And we actually put on some decent clothes when we were heading into the abyss of all is lost. And if I can personally say, what is lost on? I think it's what Jamie Dimon, the head of JP Morgan, said a couple of weeks ago. He said, really, the only work from home issue is this. For people that really want to hustle, there's not a great way. You know, I can't have 43 Zooms. I can't be popping up into your screens. I think I understand what he means tangibly and intangibly for that. But these forums, I'd rather be getting ready for a soda of some sort after this. But they're pretty dang good right now, aren't they? And so we had the societal shift of, we better start dressing normally again. We better start shaving a bit, or all that. I didn't think that was happening. We all thought we'd keep eating our food and sitting here and locked in. And so there's this fascinating behavioral transformation that's happened.
And isn't that a great link from what you're saying to what, David, I'd like to ask you about, is that when on whatever date, the 13th of March 2020, when everybody in the planet seemed to be working from home, there was more than one person putting on their grown-up panties to make sure the whole thing worked, right?
Yeah, all of it, not just the connectivity, but the electrical infrastructure, the security infrastructure, the whole world. It reminds me of, do you ever see the movie Apollo 13, where they asked that module to do something it was never intended to do, or not in that way? And the engineer behind the scenes during the whole movie was, I don't know if that's going to work. I remember we didn't design it with this stress in mind. Remember, and then when it worked, they said, I knew it would work, and all of a sudden they were super confident. I think we were all, the idea of remote work had long been around, but it just hadn't been stress tested, and it hadn't been stress tested with non-engineering or technology curious people. It was everybody, and it worked fantastically. I do just want to add 2 seconds on kind of your premise about data and steam. Yes, I think the analogy is appropriate, but I just think that, at least the way I think about it, is kind of 2 different pieces. Steam wasn't you had the steam car, the steam boat, at least here in the States, the steam, all these other things. Steam was put into devices in a million different ways. You had the technology of steam, and then you had the devices that it was put into. So you have the data. And I think there's wild opportunity for big data. I mean, the promise of it is, we've kind of said here, is the ability to understand and control this chaotic world in a way that we never have before. And I'm sure there will be, the 5th and 6th and 7th and 100th industrial revolution in future times. At the same time, the consequence of that is the ability to understand, manipulate, and control. So the cool thing about us that operate centers of data is, as we're getting wiser at this, we're also able to then, while we're enabling the commodity of the whole world, the ideas of the whole world, we're able to partner with our customers to shape, for example, how we buy and use energy that maybe we couldn't have if this revolution hadn't happened this way, or certainly it would have taken longer. Some other related challenges that the planet faces, we're able to leverage our industries and this commodity that we're in for human flourishing.
Here's a scary thought, right? The Industrial Revolution 46, there'll be a hologram of us 4. We won't be biologically here. There'll be a holographic panel somewhere going on. And who knows what Michael will be speaking about, because
why is that scary? I look good in a
Gary,
hologram.
Can I have hair? Is it okay?
I was about to say, I look good in a hologram.
It's a great link way. And Dave, you got it next time round. You got to lose the hair, or the rest of us have to have a midlife crisis, one or the other, right? So let's move on. Let's move on. So we've talked about a lot of stuff. And we've talked about, hopefully for those that are listening in, that there are two words in data center. Data is the why. The center facilitates the how. But we got to drive it. We got to energize it. So what exactly is going on? Well, this is interesting, okay? And for those of us who've been in and around data for a while, we realize that data centers or industrial data centers that we see today are really just an evolution of a punch card back in the 50s, or a tape drive in the 80s, or a floppy disk in the 90s, and a CD-ROM. And these clever people, the International Energy Association, have done some analysis, and they've said, you know what? We've always had data centers. They were called wiring closets. They were called on-premise. They were called whatever you called it. And more than likely, they probably were 30 to 40 times over capacity for electricity than you ever used. So their deduction is that 2020 and 2010, the global use of electricity is probably the same in the asset class called data centers. Just we're more efficient. They've broken it down, even though today or 2020 or 2019, it was 11 times more data traversing the interconnects of the network, as Michael said, between the different points of presence. The workloads are over 7.5 times. But then you got to look at what was a data center in 2010, what was a data center in 2020. The profile is changing. The efficiencies are changing. In the same way as the small corner retail shops, unfortunately, were consolidated into malls because it was a better experience, and you could basically do an awful lot more by parking your car out there and experiencing. That's what's happened. So it's really interesting to see that not an awful lot of people are really getting into the whole thing. Well, we're building these fit for purpose, specific centers of data, but they're replacing other less efficient in many spaces. So that's the centers. It's quite interesting, but it's also something that we should be mindful of. Then we get into the whole thing of this data. What's it doing? And we talk about data from the point of view of the dematerialization of the planet. Genuinely, I don't speak for my other panelists, but I had that desk. I had all that embedded carbon. I had all that embedded stuff that we made all over the world that was coming to me regularly. And now I have a phone. So amount of stuff that this digital 0 and 1 has replaced by way of carbon emissions, etc., is extraordinary. Dave, you mentioned it. You got up, you brushed your teeth, you got weighed, you went downstairs. It was a perfect temperature, right? Why? Because you have a Nest on the wall or a similar that's basically profiled you. A smart thermostat is only smart. Why? Because of data. Otherwise, it's just a dumb piece of plastic with a couple of electrodes. The data that's in the thermostat is given the smarts. And just that one device, and this is often forgotten, just that one device, 8 years now of analysis, has saved this amount of energy. So the data and the work of the data and what it's doing in society and will continue to do in society, there's probably an argument. Can we have sort of a weighing scales? Okay, we're using 1.2% of the energy in the world, but look at how much we're saving. So ultimately, to me, I live in Ireland, I see an awful lot of farms. To me, looking at a data center and saying, well, that's useless. It's only using the valuable asset that we have, is the same as looking at a cornfield. It looks pretty useless, doesn't seem to employ many jobs, doesn't seem to do much until you're told, well, actually, that's feeding everybody. So you got to ask the why. This dude, Attenborough, he recently joined Instagram and he got over 2 million followers in 22 minutes. But actually, it's not often you see a data center and saving the planet, but that's effectively what he did. He joined a data center to raise awareness to save the planet. And it's often not known that the amount of data that's in the centers is also the tools that we use to decarbonize the other industries. That just gives you a sense of what the two words do in data center. And when you look at that, Brian, and again, you think of the billions, hundreds of billions a year, 130 billion last year was spent on the infrastructure to provide packets of data to everybody. And you listen to the markets now talking about green bonds and all sorts of green bonds. There's a definite shift, isn't there? The money is definitely voting with its green fingers.
I think all of us have green bonds of some sort now. Your point is a very good one. So this industry, we've got a lot more work to do, but I think is done as good or better than most industries as far as pushing efficiency, adopting sustainable, renewable technologies, and so forth. And postal service is a simple one. We all send emails now instead of having trucks come pick it up, or we all go to our local online retailer, we buy stuff and a truck goes up and down the road, throwing packages out the door, bouncing them off our front doors. And that replaces 500 of us driving back and forth to the store, the time, the energy, all that stuff going on. So even though we look at these buildings and they suck a lot of juice, even, we keep getting more efficient, but they're taking a lot of power. But in trade for what is replaced, it's just absolutely staggering. Does not mean any of us can take our foot off the gas. Both economically, it helps us, but it helps all the society of where we live, work, and play. But boy, there is a whole bunch of crap not going on that used to go on because of this digital stuff. And we somehow get missed because look at, Northern Virginia, zillions of hours of energy going on there all the time. And they get clobbered for it, but the trade-off for what's saved of just the two small examples I bounced around is staggering.
But isn't it interesting? And I guess the wonderful thing about having you three dudes on this session is that I could handpick 3 people I wanted to be on the session, unlike other sessions where you have an awful lot of people in and on this industry that go very narrow and their background is in the centers. So they're comfortable talking about the centers and they're comfortable talking about mission critical. It's only when you get into the discussion as we've had to this point where we talk about the purpose of the center is because of data that we then start to expand out the economic social benefits of the data and whatever it's called, a nest or an autonomous vehicle, or even here, I just got installed recently a smart meter on my electrical system where now I can sell energy. If I get on my bicycle or my thermostat and run around and I can sell a few electrons into the grid. But I think that's true. I think what you're saying is very true, is that we need to be more mindful of data and centers. Can I ask you, Michael, as the champion, and I use that word with a capital C, collaboration is the biggest thing that this industry is now going to have to get over and get itself in line with. Consistency of message, consistency of ethos, consistency of targets and purpose. And I have to say, you've done some job in Europe, even though you're an American. I used to say Yank, but then I used to get beaten up because there's a big difference between the northern ones and the southern ones. So you're an American. And you've put together this brilliant thing called the Climate Neutral DC Pact. We have brought all the 800-pound gorillas and all the little chimpanzees, and you've got them all to line up and get behind an initiative of a carbon neutral data center by 2030, which is more than just electricity, right? Great job to even get them together.
Thank you. It sounds like I should break into a Jungle Book song or something. I'm not quite sure there, but
I'll be Baloo. You could be whatever you want. I just want to be.
I want to bring this back to what Brian was mentioning just a minute ago, which is there isn't just the ability for our industry to drive towards climate neutrality. And climate neutrality is efficiency, which we focus on. It's renewables, which we focus on. It's recyclability, which we're focusing on. Starting to look at scope 3, like how do we use green cement in our constructions, even capturing heat and reusing it where possible. But one of the things that's really interesting is, and this is something we're trying to engage the European Commission on, is if you look at the electricity grid of Europe, as we deploy smarts into the electricity grid, and as we use more and more renewables, one of the things that data centers can do is we have huge amounts of excess capacitance in all of our N+1 systems. And as you remove gas turbines, which have spinning devices that create this capacitance, there is no capacitance in a solar panel. There's no capacitance even in a wind turbine. we can provide that back into the smart grid. And the only country that's doing this successfully is Finland. But the reality is that that's going to be one of the things that we can do, is starting to have a higher level circular economy discussion saying, look, do you want to go to the post office, as Brian said, or do you want to have electronic methods to deliver an important mail, like DocuPost in France, or Adobe Sign or DocuSign or all the rest of the world? And I think this is the point, is we've got to be having a higher level conversation with government officials, with the press, saying, look, data centers are here to stay. And in fact, they're going to grow because more and more can be done digitally. But you have to trust us that we take our responsibility seriously. And at the moment, the press about us is negative. It's we're coal-eating, fire-breathing dragons. We're the tobacco and alcohol in the alcohol and tobacco war. Somehow alcohol is more deadly, but everybody taints tobacco as the bad enemy. We've got to fix that, and we've got to come back out to the market and say, actually, no, we are part of the solution. You have to look at the big picture, and you have to look at how we can be part of a completely renewable electricity system of the future. And that's what the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact's next goal is to get that engagement going.
And that's what I was going to say. You've used the word we quite a lot, and you don't mean we as in all of the business units of Equinix. It's very much a unified voice now. It has to be. And, every industry has its time when you realize what the secret sauce is and you realize what the secret sauce isn't. Is that time now where data center operators realize that there are table stakes and then there are a secret sauce? And the table stakes is that we need to collaborate, like what you've put together in Europe with the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, where there's certain big issues that need to be collectively looked at with hyperscales and all the rest. Why was it now is the real question. Or
it's a judo move. It's a flanking strategy. If an industry is getting a bad rap, and we honestly don't believe we deserve that bad rap, we can't just have a full frontal attack saying, I'm not bad, you are. You can't have that kind of a stupid argument. We have to actually do something to prove to the market, wait a second, these are the good guys. They are helping the economy, and they are helping us grapple with big issues as Industry 4.0 comes around. I mean, we are consuming too many resources as a race and as a species. I mean, and we've got to fix this. We've got to solve this problem. And frankly, I look at David, I look at Brian, I look at you, and all of us want this. And some of us are losing hair over it, actually. And so we've got to come out swinging, not with a full frontal attack saying, no, we're not bad. We've actually got to come out with a full frontal attack saying, look, not only did we do all these great things over the past 10 years, look at the IEA report, look what's next. We've got more up our sleeves, and we're coming with more and more really cool ideas.
Yeah. No, I like it. And David, you are evangelist. Is that your title now? Are you a chief evangelist officer? Is that what you would call yourself or be seen as?
I wish they would, because I've got some white patent leather shoes with Pat Boone's picture on each toe.
Oh, beautiful.
I've perfected the chicken walk, but no, they call me innovation, VP of innovation, but it's essentially an evangelist. Yeah.
So when you're talking now to people, what's the biggest objection to getting them into realizing that data is good, centers are needed, the outcome is better? Where are you now with your evangelizing? Are you still at this is what a data center is, and you take pins and pipes? Are we past that?
It depends on the audience, right? In any conversation, who are you having? Who is your audience? If it is a non-data center industry audience, they're on the periphery of technology, and they're concerned about where's the consumption of resources, not just energy. Could be water, could be generating waste. E-waste is a spectacular challenge for the world. And when they hear all of these computer systems live in a facility like ours, and they hear of data breaches, and they hear of waste being shipped, recycled irresponsibly or shipped off to third world countries and destroying the environments there, or they hear the big energy consumption, and they don't have the whole story. They have part of the story. In fact, what's the great benefits of big data, as we said before, is our ability to get insights in a way, and you certainly want to benefit from big data if they're taking the MRI or CAT scan of your brain and they're sending it to have the machines and AI and neurologists around the world looking at it to see how those spots that aren't supposed to be there, how they can evaluate how we can save or prolong your life or create quality of life. We want big data in those instances. But there's this idea. And so depending upon the audience, I have a conversation about the great benefit that data, when used responsibly, as everything used responsibly, can benefit for us and change the world. But also what our responsibility as operators of data centers. We have the ability to influence how energy is created, how energy is bought, how water is consumed or replaced with something else. We have a responsibility on how waste is processed that comes in and out of our data centers. So depending upon the conversation and their animosity towards or their understanding of the centers of data, that will shape the conversation.
And again, a bit like what Michael was saying about sort of pincer movements and sort of making sure you knock them at the feet and kiss them at the head or whatever. It's important when you're talking to people that you're talking to them collectively,
right?
You know, not just individually. And I think that that's something that's happened of late. And you know, I go back to it, and I might be Brian DeRico saying about table stakes, or it could be Michael. I'm not sure. These are just table stakes. But it is also that there's a maturity that comes with third decade of commercial data centers, that we realize now that there's no, you know, I haven't heard anybody pitch up recently, anyone say we're 999999999. That's not a, you know, that's not a thing. It used to be a thing, right, but it's not a thing anymore because it's just not a thing. Is that where we are now, that there comes with maturity cycles of an industry, that they're more capable and comfortable in their own skin to come forward as a gang and say, look, no secret sauce here, let's get this sorted? And is that natural cycle of evolution?
So, sort of. I would just say that it, again, depending upon who my audience is. So once upon a time, probably for all of us, when we were building data centers, at one point, everything had to be 2N. You had to have double everything. And then it went to concurrently maintainable, which is what you're describing there, and the 5 nines or greater. We have had this really interesting collision of, you have these, what we now call hyperscale, the world's largest consumers, generators, platforms of data. Many of them, if not most of them, have a social and energy agenda, meaning how do we help human flourishing? And so part of that is, as they've become more sophisticated about what the temperatures of data centers can operate at, humans have to be able to tolerate it, but it can be much warmer than it was before. So that's allowed us to be more efficient. Most of us that are in this space now, we're fast followers of their designs because they design and build their own data centers in addition to using our data centers. They have some of the smartest people on the planet helping to solve that problem. And they're very open-minded in having a conversation with us. How do we co-engineer? How do we co-deploy? How do we co-operate in such a way that, of course, solves the product problem, the business problem that they're trying to solve, but also that we're good citizens, we're good energy citizens, we're good social citizens, and then bring governance around it. And our industry, the leaders of our industry, whether they're a public REIT or private equity organization, in order for them, back to your table stakes comment, in order for us to do business with the most important buyers in our world, or certainly the largest buyers in our world, we have to adopt that same. It would be wonderful if everybody did it for altruistic motives. They don't. But if you want to stay an operator and serve this industry, you have to align with them. And it's really cool to see what Michael's doing, what Brian's doing, and other organizations like ours are doing to join them to develop this out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it goes back to what Brian said earlier as well, is that if you're still, you can have all the innovation here if you want, but if you're still stuck in concrete or permit issues, it just stops innovation.
Yeah, Gary, I think a lot of what David was saying is effectively is this shift from I'm buying a thing, a center, a network, or whatever, to I'm buying the output that thing will enable. That is very, very different. The car isn't the car and the four wheels. The car is a way to get somewhere. And you buy the car based on the characteristics of what, where, why, and how you need to get somewhere. The buyers are starting to do that. And so the way we don't do, you know, when's the last time a hotel went up that advertised high speed Ethernet plugs in every room? It would be foolish. Like, we're not building hub and spoke. We're building this any to any that pandemic has shown us. But it's the output of where do we need services available, not where do we need a building, where do I need a plug. And that essentially, so David and Michael and my company, our job is to really be on the, let's listen to these biggest buyers, and the biggest buyers listen to every other consumer in the world who are their customers, and that output will let us continue to thrive or become, you know, the horse and buggy people. So if we focus specifically on what are we enabling, then you wind up in the right spot. If you focus on what worked yesterday, then you focus on what worked yesterday, and that doesn't get you there.
So we've 10 minutes left, and we've got one more area that we'd like to just briefly talk about. So we've talked about the amount of devices. My God, 1 billion, trillion, zillion devices creating data tsunamis that we've never even got our head around. That's a lot of floppy disks, by the way. Let's talk about the data security, data privacy. You know, some of this stuff is just mind-boggling when you think that in 2025, it's anticipated that up to 20% of data that traverses this thing called the internet will have potential to be critical, life critical. The duty of care that you dudes have for global society is huge. We just by not coincidence, shows you the depths of depravity that some of the bad actors will go to. In the middle of a pandemic, we just had our whole health service closed down last 3 days due to a ransomware. So it just shows you that, you know, the role that you dudes are playing, physical security, virtual security. Question I have is this, along with the environmental front and center of both your and your tenants' mind right now? Data privacy, data security, the value of it. As somebody told me recently that was doing the analogy of data is the new oil. He looked at them and says, you can contain an oil slick. I thought it was the best I've held back. You cannot contain data. Michael.
Gary, on that point, just a quick one. One of the things that I think people forget about, and by the way, this is a sin as much of a technical geek like a developer as it is to my mother, who might not understand that she's being phished horribly on some text message from the IRS, which isn't a text message from the IRS, is that people assume that everything can just go over the internet. And I think this is a fundamental thing that data center operators around the world have to realize. We offer a completely alternative solution to the internet. We take people's internet attack surface off the internet and allow people to build private layer 0, layer 1, and layer 2 connectivity between parties, totally eliminating an entire element of the security, which is that any old hacker can find any old weakness in any old port and break through it. And I think this is going to be a fundamental thing, which is physical security in a data center is now, do you have the appropriate cross connects or virtual circuitry available in your site to keep traffic off the internet, keep it safe, and only allow edge exposure?
Okay. And does that bring, Brian, the big white gorilla in the corner, human behavior? Still number one, isn't it?
I think what Michael says is still absolutely needed. and is trying desperately to flip into any of the zero trust security platforms out there that say you will be followed anywhere around the globe based on who you are. And do we know if a fingerprint's good enough, or an eyeball scan, or password, or all of the above, or the hardware address of your device? I think they're wrestling with that implementation, but essentially anything you do should be based on the policies that were set forth for you by whatever platform it is you're playing with at home, and your healthcare site, and your employee database, whatever it may be. We're not quite there yet, and there's more work to do on it. And lots of it is, I'm getting a mortgage right now, and it's funny, they had to get on the phone and validate some stuff with me, this third party. And so they call the mortgage company with me on the phone, and they say, hey, is this Brian on the phone? Yes. Okay, and you're still, and they give me all my info, and I say yes to it all. I'm going, good golly, you're on this with this third party to validate who I am, and you're giving me all the information before I even say who I am. Yes, the human component is, there
is only one Brian, though. I mean, everybody knows that there is only one Brian.
All of my successes are just for me. All of my failures are certainly someone else's fault. If you're going down that,
you obviously came to the same college as my wife.
Absolutely.
David, you're so quiet and respectful there. Data sovereignty, data protection. Wearing your other hat, is this another group of people you talk to about keeping it all safe? Yeah,
it is. I just have somebody on my podcast, and he's going to come back to have a conversation again. He's a musician here in the area, and he's just been hired. He's also a tech guy, just been hired by a firm using blockchain with music, because they want to make music available to everybody, obviously. But they also want the artists to be able to own their own product and be able to take it with them and not have duplicates out there if they don't want duplicates. And in maybe an indirect way, I think it's the same thing. How do we have authenticity? I mean, one of the biggest questions that we have in the world today is that authentic, especially in an economy of attention? That's what we're talking about. The world today is, how do I get your attention and hold your attention here? And so, or how do I stop? In our world, we had the pipeline stop, right? I didn't have to steal data, I just had to stop it. Or a ransomware event that you just described with healthcare. And so we're all trying to do that while also balancing, I don't want to create a surveillance state. So how do I do that? What is the role of privacy in the new world? How do I protect my independence, or do I protect it? And it's a question that we're all wrestling with. And how, as an operator of the center of data, do I partner with the people that are developing the systems within that, so that we don't create any unnecessary vulnerabilities? It is absolutely a conversation we're regularly having.
We have 30 seconds each to slag off, slander, do whatever you want. You've been all so nice to each other. You've been so respectful for each other. So this is your opportunity to have a good old cut at your competitor. If you don't want to, that's okay. You can say nice things again.
Gary, I'm grateful that by me being here, that the gentlemen with me, including yourself, look erudite and show your profundity and genius, if only because my intellect is so diminished. Thank you for that, for lifting.
Brian, you were doing so wonderfully well, and people were actually lapping it up when you came out with
Brian, do you actually have a thesaurus in your lap or something, or what's going on there, boys?
There's a word magniloquent. It's not a compliment. It means
he's got the singularity chip.
I got nothing else to say. Thank you.
Singularity chip. He's in cheat mode.
Gentlemen, this has been way too much fun. It was an hour swiftly we went through. Grace, are you still here? Grace here? Grace still here? Grace is not here. So on behalf of our partners in Convergint, I say thank you. It was fun. We have another session. This is only the warm-up, of course. We have another one of these tomorrow where we'll actually prep up on what we want to talk about, maybe, or maybe we'll just continue on this. Thanks, guys. You are absolutely brilliant. As I said at the outset, at least you three have thoughts that are worth leading. And we'll have another chat tomorrow about something other than profanity. What was that word you used, David? Dorico?
Don't
Profundius?
talk down to me, Mr. Conley. It's profundity.
Profundius.
It means genius, as you are. Go look in the mirror. Profundity.
Oh, for fuck! Oh, Jesus
Yes.
Christ! Oh my God! You should be
I'm getting
drinking.
on-
You
no one's gonna
need to be
correct
drinking what Mr. Winterson's drinking. At least he's acknowledging he's a glass in his hand.
me. Thank you.
Gents, it's been a